Thank you everyone for joining us today. As I mentioned, it's so great to see so many familiar names and some faces up. We have an awesome program lined up for you today. And with that, I am just going to kick it off to Jan Costner, the Chamber's Senior VP for Membership and Corporate Relations, to kick us off today.
Great. Thank you so much, Amelia, and thank you so much for putting together this great program. As Amelia said, I'm Jan Costner. I'm the Senior Vice President of Membership and Corporate Relations for the Chamber, and we really appreciate you joining us today for this webinar, The Great Resignation, Attracting and Retaining the Workforce of Tomorrow, presented by Mid-Market Chicago. The Chamber is committed to the ever-growing middle market, which is exactly why we're here today. The Chamber's Middle Market Chicago program is dedicated to providing the programming, networking, and resources middle market companies need across the region to grow and prosper. We would not be able to do this without our host events like this, without our generous support of our members, specifically our mid-market sponsors, BDO, BMO Harris Bank, and Aon. Thank you so much for your continued leadership, support, and investment in Chicago and the Chamber. I think that we could all say that one of the most unforeseen consequences of the pandemic is the impact on our current labor market. Talent shortage is at a 10-year high, and about half of Americans in the workforce looking for a new job. Nearly 70% of employers with open positions they cannot seem to fill. Reasons vary: work-life balance, job satisfaction, access to childcare, feeling valued, increased salary, burnout, and more. Yet despite the record job openings, low hiring rates, and increase in resignations have created a skewed labor market. And the companies are once again finding themselves struggling to attract and retain talent. And as a result, we are now seeing many starting to leverage creative practices to appeal to candidates, such as flexible work policies, education, stipends, and child care support. We are joined today by 4 experts who are sharing their perspective on this historical impact and the growth opportunities that we have, for now and in the long term. Please join me in welcoming Candance Chow, who's the Managing Director and Co-founder of NextGroup, Kenney, who is the Human Capital Solutions at Aon, Gratteau, who's the Managing Director at Human Capital Management at BDO USA, Hilary Phillips, Metta, who's the Vice President of Employee Experience at Edelman. Thank you again for joining the Chamber to share your perspective, and I think we're going to learn a lot today on the Mid-Market Chicago program. Before we kick off the program, please allow me to introduce Steve Ferrara and ask him to say a few words. In addition to serving as BDO's Chief Operating Officer, Steve also serves as the Chamber's Board of Directors and is a former chair. Steve, take it away.
Thank you, Jan. Good morning, everyone. And thank you to everyone joining us today and our speakers for taking the time to share their insights. You'll hear from them in just a moment. BDO is proud to be the founding and presenting sponsor of Mid-Market Chicago. When we partnered with the Chamber back in 2017 to first launch the program, we saw an opportunity to develop programming and resources that would support and help grow Chicagoland's middle market companies, who we all know are the backbone of our regional economy. And along with our partners at BMO Harris and Aon, we continue to do just that. As Jan mentioned, I am the Chief Operating Officer for BDO. So I, along with many of you, am seeing today's topic play out painfully in real time every day. This labor market is unlike any other we've seen and requires real, thoughtful strategies to stay competitive. So I am personally looking forward to hearing our experts weigh in on how to do just that. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker. Kenney is a director in Aon's Human Capital Solutions division, where she helps lead the firm's consulting efforts to develop products and services for companies experiencing technology disruption, looking to optimize their workforce and/or planning for the future of work. Hannah brings over 10 years of consulting experience on a variety of human capital, total rewards, and compensation issues including short and long-term incentive plan design. Hannah, it's all yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Now, that was a great introduction. So I'm probably going to skip right ahead into some of our content here today. It's really great to meet everyone or to meet everyone virtually and dive into this, really meaty topic on the Great Resignation. I think there's a lot of different words we were talking as speakers before everyone joined on some of the names or the new titles here, but just as another little tidbit about me, I've spent the last 2 to 3 years focusing on the future of work. And what that has meant lately in the context of the pandemic is really helping organizations as they react to the pandemic, as they attempt to future-proof their workforce and try to emerge successfully from it. But I'll be the first to say that, the expansiveness of this Great Resignation took me a little by surprise. So if we move ahead to the next slides here, while, I'm very familiar, was very comfortable talking to a lot of different companies about scarcity within certain jobs or, roles like tech jobs, I think it was really interesting for me to hear in the context of this Great Resignation from companies all over the spectrum, from manufacturers to retailers to life sciences companies and technology companies, that they're having trouble hiring and finding and retaining their talent. There's been reports, by Microsoft and Gallup that 40% or more of the workforce is considering quitting, which to me is quite remarkable how widespread. If we think about that and look at where that's been coming from, there's obviously, or there has been a great expansion of jobs in the market. Burnout is up, burnout is extremely high, and engagement is down. And we're also seeing a lot more small business registration. In some ways, this turnover is actually to be expected, particularly when you take a longer term view at the macro trends of turnover following the economic activity. We actually see that turnover does tend to spike following a downturn, which can kind of make sense if you think about it. Employees, people, everyone was hunkering down during the pandemic, sheltering in place, trying to make sure that they and their families were safe. And so maybe this is a bit of pent-up demand. But, does that really cover it all? So if we move on to the next slide, I think there's a lot more than just the economic downturn at play here. It's been covered in a multitude of articles. You can find a lot of sound bites on this. And to start, employees, I think what's really different here is employees are demanding different things. Their views and values have shifted from what they required pre-pandemic. They're requiring more flexibility in their roles and more transparency with management. We're also seeing wage growth and some people taking advantage of that by switching roles, as well as the continued impact of many different generations in the workforce, including the retiring of kind of the boomer generation. And so, what can companies do? If we move to the next slide, when I first approach this problem or first try to think about this problem, I try to put myself in the shoes of an employee, or really all of the employees, as they're leaving, as they're resigning. I think the hardest part there is that it unfortunately doesn't have one answer. We have to kind of think about all of the different dimensions affecting an employee's experience in an organization. There ultimately isn't going to be one silver bullet, which we can point to and say, do X and you'll win the war for talent. If there was, first of all, everyone would be doing it. And somehow I'm not sure that would actually make it work though. But, from an employee's perspective, when they change roles, they'll consider things like the work environment, the way that they are doing work, what the work is, but they'll also consider their pay and their compensation, total rewards, as well as things like career progression and the relationship that they have with managers and leaders. So with so many different dimensions, there are so many choices of what to address. And it can be quite overwhelming, as we heard earlier, for an organization to think about where to put their attention. But for me and for us at Aon, the first step really should be clear. And we've outlined that on the next slide here. It's to get the data, to be informed about your decision, to understand what is happening in your organization, using your workforce data and using analysis on what's actually happening. This is even more important now, I would say, than, through everything that we've experienced in the pandemic. The rules have changed. And so your hunches and the kind of in the box thinking may no longer work. The rules of the road has changed and we need to change with them. The use of data has really come through loud and clear from senior executives in the latest Aon survey as well. They're looking to data and analytics to really drive business results as they approach this, increasingly volatile and crazy volatile world. So let me give you an example here of what this might look like, particularly as it relates to turnover. We recently completed a project for a global technology company based in the US. They were worried about turnover in light of some of the changes that they were planning to their bonus program and how that might impact their workforce. So before they actually implemented this change, we partnered with them to run an analysis and look at the data from the employees who had left, seeing what might correlate to the higher turnover, looking at all different things for these employees, like their internal grade, their age, their experience, things like rewards, so bonus payout and merit payout, things like tenure, and also even the experience or tenure of their managers within the organization. And what we found for this client in particular was that the biggest turnover risk was actually among younger employees. And when it comes to pay, when it comes to compensation, equity compensation was more of an effective driver of retention on a dollar for dollar basis than something like salary or bonus and bonus payout. So these findings were really helpful to the HR team as it approached the program change with a better perspective on how to implement their decisions, all because of this kind of deeper dive on the data. Now, the key drivers of turnover, that might be different for your organization, but I do want to highlight two other areas that we at Aon have heard time and time again, particularly in the current environment. And so if we move to just the next slide here, one thing that's been increasingly prevalent over the course of the pandemic is the importance of enabling leaders and managers. In a recent pulse survey, in Aon's recent pulse survey of over 1,500 companies worldwide, we found that 90% of companies are examining their manager and leadership training as a priority to implement their future of work strategies. And if I take a step back and think about why that might be, if I think about, what is the role of a people manager? Managers have kind of this key responsibility to set the tone and really bring to life the culture of an organization. They're the ones that represent the organization and have full contact with every single person that works or every single employee in the organization. And their role has been even more challenging during the pandemic with different needs and where things need to be scheduled even more to connect over Zoom. And there's no kind of casual water cooler conversation that just doesn't happen. Organizations are therefore recognizing the importance of empowering people managers to help make decisions and behave in the best interest of both the company and their people. Therefore, they're assessing and building this capability within their managers to help decrease turnover, to help build resilience among the workforce, particularly as we continue to navigate this, kind of mid/hopefully soon ending pandemic world here. And then finally, on the next slide, one thing that tops the list of reasons for turnover quite frequently is career opportunities. And as we think about the changes in the world, maybe accelerated by the pandemic, but things such as, the increase in digital and technology, the increase in automation, this has also brought on the depletion and the change in certain roles, as well as the birth of others. We've heard, and I'll share with you, that the average shelf life of hard skills is decreasing. It's down to about 5 years. And, with hard skills decreasing, the increase of importance in soft skills is essential to the future of work. Traits such as curiosity and learnability are considered fundamental to creating a workforce that can react with agility to the changing demands and requirements in the face of uncertainty and in the face of technology change. What that means in reality for the organization and how that might have an effect on your retention and on your turnover is that the way that you look at careers, the way that you look at progression has to change or has to reflect that change in the market. And so, a move climbing up straight up the ladder, it's no longer, or it's in some ways less accurate to how careers actually work. Not everyone just ascends upward. They kind of, they might take something interesting, a different role that might be more interesting to them. And so our job and what we can do as companies or organizations is to help facilitate that mobility and that growth of employees through that journey, both in terms of facilitating the acquisition of different skills, such as the softer skills, as well as thinking about how we map jobs and career progression within our own organization to make it clear for employees that growth is possible internally. And the benefit to organizations is really quite clear as well, particularly now when organizations are looking to hold on to talent and are thinking differently about reskilling staff rather than letting them go in light of this global talent shortage that we are working in at the moment. And so as I think about the last 2 years and kind of finish up here shortly on the last slide, if I think about how we've landed in this competitive environment with high turnover, one thing is crystal clear, and that is the change is here. Employees are clearly choosing that change, as we can see in the increased resignations. And, I think there are many aspects to why this is happening. There are many aspects to what we can do about it. But by using your data to drive better decisions, there's an opportunity for the organization to, keep up and have that capability to change as well, and to change for the better to help, facilitate this as you hopefully continue to decrease your turnover, or at least stay consistent with what you're looking to do to drive the results that you need for the future. With that, I believe I will hand it to Amelia to get us kicked off.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. And thank you so much for sharing that. That was a great kind of level set as we move into the panel. So I'm going to keep you up on the virtual stage, if you will, and then I'm going to ask our other panelists to please join me, Candance, Greg, and Hilary. It's wonderful to see you all. So for the attendees, the format for today is going to look like this. We're going to do a panel discussion. We're going to have about 10 or 15 minutes for Q&A towards the end. And so you can either submit those questions via the chat function at any time during the panel discussion. I'll be trying to monitor the chat as well. Or let me know, like when you submit it, that you'd be happy to unmute and ask your question yourself. So we did this as a meeting today because I think the topic really lends to kind of like an engaging conversation. So for anyone that is willing to unmute and allow me to see your face and ask the question, we can do that towards the end too. All right, with that, I'm going to ask Hannah, obviously we've heard from you. I'm going to ask for our other speakers to just do kind of a quick round of intros as well. And as part of your introduction, if you could just take a moment to tell us about one way you think our workforce will look permanently different as a result of the pandemic. Candace, can I start with you?
Sure. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for allowing me to join the panel today. It's been very exciting and exciting to talk with these experts. I'm Candance Chow. I'm managing director of an organization called NextGroup. We're a diversity, talent, and placement firm in Chicagoland, focused solely on recruiting and retaining female talent. So working with women who are pivoting careers, women who are transitioning, as well as re-entering the workplace after a break. And so, as you can imagine, our work has gotten even more complex post-pandemic. In terms of kind of the impact of the pandemic, I will focus in on what I know best about women. And I think what I'm seeing is certainly the first wave of the pandemic. We were very focused, as we should have been, on the needs and of frontline workers, service workers. Now it's looking like there's a reckoning among professionals, and I would say women in particular, that something's got to give. And this points to Hannah's point earlier. In a normal, traditionally, 40% of professional women voluntarily leave the workforce at one point or another, primarily for reasons of caregiving. And now at least 50% of women managers, based on the most recent McKinsey study, those who stayed in are citing that they are almost always burnt out and considering leaving the workforce. So my concern and my call to everyone is, we could be looking at 2/3 of women, the great pool of talent, leaving work. And what are we going to do about that?
I'm looking forward to digging into that a little bit more, because I know that came up on the prep calls as well. Greg, can I go to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll echo the other panelists and say it's great to be here. So my name's Greg Gratteau. I am the managing director for BDO's human capital management practice. Our practice is a national practice that helps small to mid-size organizations with all things HR, either through outsourced support or HR consulting. To dive into the question that Amelia asked, the thing that I think is going to categorically be different moving forward is really where the power rests in the relationship between the employer and the employee. What I mean by that, to put it in a practical sense, is historically, when companies wanted to hire somebody, they established a job, they established the benefit structure, they decided what it was that they wanted to offer, and they went out and posted the job, and they let people come to them. That's categorically and fundamentally changed. Through this Great Resignation, people and future employees are being much more selective on what it is they want from an organization. We have had plenty of clients that have had tremendous issues in filling roles the old way. And what they've actually done is they've gone now to the market, and part of the recruitment process is asking the potential employees, what are the things that they're looking for? So I think fundamentally that is going to continue in the future as individuals are able to utilize technology and really continue this new way of work.
Absolutely. And I actually had dinner with a friend last night who works in HR, and in preparation for this, and he had a lot of similar sentiments to share. So looking forward to hearing more about that. And then Hilary, can I go to you?
Sure. I'm Hilary Phillips, Metta, Vice President at Edelman in our employee experience practice. So spent 10 years partnering with clients across industries to develop and execute employee engagement strategies and improve culture, accelerate organizational transformation. So we guide senior leaders in building trust internally and helping them better understand and communicate with their diverse employee audiences, and design and implement unique experiences that really work to shift employee mindsets and behaviors. In terms of how the workforce will look differently, the latest Edelman Trust Barometer report on the belief-driven employee highlights how the events of the past couple of years have caused this great reset, which several of you have already mentioned. Employees are really looking inward and reflecting very deeply on what they want to prioritize in both their lives and at work. So moving forward, they'll have much higher expectations of their employers, and they'll seek those who share their values and offer a much more balanced lifestyle.
Wonderful, thank you. So as we kind of dig in, I know Hannah did a fantastic job of kind of giving us kind of that high level of what's going on. So we called this event the Great Resignation. I've now heard turnover tsunami. I've heard the Great Reset and the reboot revolution. The Cliff Notes quick version is a lot of people are quitting their job, 40%. I saw a status from both Microsoft and Manpower that put that number about 40% of people right now kind of looking for a new role. So that obviously creates a landscape that is incredibly challenging for employers. And as Greg alluded to, HR managers have a different kind of power dynamic. And as Hilary alluded to, they're at the same time are being held to higher expectations. So my kind of next question to the panel is just, this landscape is changing by the minute, right? We're getting new data all the time. What are you seeing in terms of some of the greatest challenges faced by employers recruiting in this market? Hannah, can I go back to you with this one?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you really have to think about how you're approaching talent and how you're thinking about talent. You mentioned recruiting in this market, but I would say one of the most important ways or places that organizations can actually recruit is internally. So rather than just looking externally, you can think about your current talent market, how your current workforce might be reskilled or, reimagined and, kind of shepherded into the roles where you have this opportunity. So I think that's a huge opportunity for organizations, but it is definitely a shift in thinking on how we've gone about things in the past.
Candance, can I go to you next? Because you're obviously living this, right? With NextGroup and staffing. And so kind of what are you hearing or what are you seeing in your day-to-day as you're working with your clients?
Yeah, I would say, and we work both at the executive level with, CEOs that are intentionally focused on diversifying their talent base. And then obviously in the day-to-day working with the human capital organization, HR organization to do the recruitment. And I actually think the change in recruiting has to happen with more competency building and capacity building within all through the recruiting organization, the human capital organization. Hannah had mentioned, we're looking for different skills now. We're looking for curiosity. We're looking for soft skills. Yet I've seen at the recruiting level, we still kind of use the same paradigm and model when we review resumes, and we're still looking for that chronology of experience and having done certain things at certain times. So I actually think the biggest change needs to be made, and especially for mid-market firms where they do have internal capacity in their, hopefully in their human capital organizations. It's really building competency throughout the organization on how do you recruit, how do you assess candidates differently? How do you find, you're not hiring a resume, you're hiring a person, and you're hiring a person that you want to grow. You want a person who's curious. You want a person who's going to stay for the long haul. That's a very different process than looking and seeing what people have done and when they did it. So that would be that's the recommendation I make to many of the clients that I'm working with. And it's not easy, right? It has to have investment and time, but I think that will lead to way better outcomes in terms of the recruitment process.
Absolutely. And I love that you kind of hit on the factor of middle market companies too. So for those on the line, the Chamber's middle market program, we define kind of companies in that $10 million to $1 billion range. And I think I saw a stat that said on average, these companies have one HR person for every 75 to 100 employees. And so I think you're especially seeing those folks during the pandemic incredibly overworked and trying to figure out how to navigate it. And so kind of carrying some of that into the recruitment efforts is important as well. Greg, can I get you to weigh in on this one? Because I know you're working with a lot of middle market companies as well and kind of helping them navigate right now as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I think what Hannah and Candace said are great, and I think I could build off of that a little bit. But let me answer this in two ways. One theoretical and one really more practical. Because when we talk about the challenges of talent acquisition now, the theoretical one kind of builds off of what Candace was saying, and that is, what is it that we think we're trying to find? A lot of different people define it different ways, but I think the easiest way to look at it is the understanding that right now there are legitimately 5 generations in the workforce. And when you look at those 5 generations, each generation looks at work, looks at the relationships within work, and looks at what they're trying to get out of work completely differently. So a historical job posting that says, here you go, here's the job, this is what it is, it might appeal to one generation, but it's not going to appeal to another generation. Most the youngest generation, Generation Z, we know that their loyalty is to the job experience, not to the company, not to the manager, the experience. And so we have to be able, when we're creating these job now experiences, to cater to the types of people that we really want to fill those jobs. So from a hiring standpoint, that's a big challenge and a very big difference to how it was pre-pandemic. From a tactical standpoint, a challenge that many small to mid-sized organizations are facing is how to actually hire people. So think about this. One of the great things that is coming out of this is the adoption of technology. And through that adoption of technology, you can now source talent. Even if you're based in Chicago, you can source talent all over the United States. Most small to mid-sized organizations don't understand, though, if I'm going to hire somebody in a new state, all of the hoops that you need to jump through to actually be able to do that. It used to be everybody just came to the office, and that's not the case anymore. So from that tactical standpoint, there are a lot of challenges that small to mid-sized organizations are facing as they employ people in this virtual world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to dig in later to that generational as well, because I think that's something that's going to come up and kind of cut across a lot of what else we discussed. And this is actually a great segue to Hilary as well, because I know, Hilary, when we chatted, you talked about just that, kind of how companies market themselves and the messaging and how that relates back to how they recruit and keep talent. So can I pose this question to you as well to talk a little bit about what you're seeing?
Sure. So we know that what motivates employees to join and to stay just a couple of years ago, it's shifted dramatically. Trust Insights tell us that 6 in 10 are now choosing, leaving, avoiding, considering their employer based on their values and beliefs. Employees across demographics are considering employers based on social responsibility and their stance on controversial issues over success in the marketplace. There's currently a huge gap in these newly forged expectations, or what employees consider to be the deal breakers, including the career opportunities, personal empowerment, and social impact. There's a gap between that and how employers are generally performing. And when employer expectations aren't met, that's when people are choosing to leave or choosing to not join a company. In fact, we found that 1 in 5 employees have left or are planning to leave their current job in the next 6 months in search of an employer who will meet their expectations. And 1 in 3 said that they left their job solely because the company remained silent on a societal or a political issue that they believe they had an obligation to publicly address. So this is going to pose real challenges for recruiters if their company isn't meeting the expectations of current or prospective employees.
Can I do a follow-up question for you, Hilary, just based on the trust barometer? Because I also, and by the way, everyone, we are going to PDF Hannah's slides and share some of the links to the studies that our speakers are referencing as well. And this is also recorded. So we'll be making sure you guys have all of that information, because I know this is a lot to take in the hour as well. But back to Greg's point about the multi-generation. When you look at kind of that, I think the number was one in three were thinking of leaving because their employer remained silent on an issue, societal or political. Do you see that cut across generations at all? I can imagine that potentially Gen Z might be, if you might see it higher.
We actually did. We broke it down. It's in the report. It is high. It's across generations. You will see differentials, between the different age groups. But I think there's a New York Times report a couple of years ago that said that this is consistent across generations. It's just the younger ones that are more willing to speak up about it. So yeah, some of our data does show that it is consistent, but you do see it more prominently with the younger folks.
Wonderful. We have a few university partners on the line, so I'm excited that they might have some questions at the end too, because I know they are living and breathing this, placing kind of their students into internships and full-time roles. Something that I kind of wanted to make sure we had time to dig into today is the sort of remote and hybrid work, right? And the enhanced flexibility. I think for the most part, it looks like most people are dialing in from home offices today. I see maybe a couple, looks like they're in an office. And so what we're seeing is a growing divide right now between workers who can do their jobs fully remote, and then also workers that must be on the front lines. So your healthcare, service industries, manufacturing. This is also happening at a time when people are quitting their jobs rather than return to the office. So what suggestions does our panel have for employers kind of navigating this? So if you're an employer deciding, how do I bring someone back? What does that look like? How do I communicate that, especially if I'm balancing a workforce that must be there in person versus one that's potentially been fully remote for the past 18 months or however long we've been in this pandemic at this point. Hannah, can I go to you for this one?
Absolutely. So I think, with that dichotomy between the two potentially classes of employees, that's definitely something that we want to avoid. And I would assume that, is the same for all organizations as they think about this challenge. So, that brings up a big question. And what we have been talking to a lot of companies about is really thinking about how they can increase flexibility for populations that might not be able to be remote, either because, they're in manufacturing or they need to be on site for certain, regulations or restrictions there. And so how can you incorporate flexibility? Is that with flexible scheduling? Is that with, variable, if there's any all hands meetings that they don't actually have to be on site, just thinking differently about those populations. I think we've proven that a lot of jobs can be remote. And so it is actually very difficult if you're making the choice to bring everyone back in a consistent, more than just a couple days in the office. I think that is a really big challenge. And so thinking about ways to balance the scorecard there with flexibility, I think is really important as you navigate this kind of interim time and as we emerge from the pandemic.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I want to get Candace's thoughts here because of just flexibility in the workplace and how it impacts some of the clients that you're working with and the women that you place in these roles. Are you hearing anything from the women you're recruiting from about willingness to go back, hybrid, remote, any of that?
I have had one person who I placed who had recently left their other company, because they were being mandated to go back, and she had family caregiving needs of adult caregiving needs and just couldn't risk that. So certainly flexibility, for women, for men as well, is increasingly important, because we have to be able to bring our whole being to our work. And I think, our employers need to realize that. I also see, but I do think for many people, hybrid is like the best answer, right? Because they want some level of, it's also very difficult for anyone, and especially women, to create boundaries when at home. And so this sense of burnout, I think, is also exacerbated because the multitude of responsibilities you have, at least when you're going from place A to place B, there's a point of transition and you can try to shut down whatever is happening at home or that you have responsibility to. Mentally, we can't do that when we're doing it all in the same place. So I think that's part of the burnout. And I think that we need to think about, hybrid opportunities to be in community, as well as to also have the flexibility and the, kind of the efficiency of missing that commute. But lastly, I guess looking at it from an equity standpoint, too, because we have, as Hannah said, these two classes of workers potentially, I think we need to look at, it's like she said, not a one size fits all policy, and being fair may not be being equitable. So what are the intrinsic benefits of being able to work from home, and how could we potentially replicate that for folks who don't have that option, whether that's transportation costs, whether that's childcare safety net, and direct costs in time. How can we make it more equitable, even though we know we have to have folks in both situations? Oops, Amelia, you're muted.
Gosh, we're 18 months into this and you guys still have to tell me to mute sometimes. Highly embarrassing. I'm going to move on. You did mention the equity piece, which I think is really important. And on the prep call, I want to get Greg's thoughts here because he alluded to something similar with the kind of boundaries between work and home life in a kind of fully remote world. And I think, what was it, Greg? You said grass is always a little bit greener. Can you speak to that too a little bit?
Yeah. I'll describe it a little bit differently, but that's the general concept. Hannah and Candance talked about these, two potential different classes. The challenge that employers are going to have is that the employees themselves are actually establishing some of the guardrails around this. What I mean by that is the people that are going back to the office, right? They're going back to the office and they're jealous because other people get to work at home, right? When I'm at the office, I got to commute in. I get stopped by Sally or Jerry at the water cooler and they complain to me about their weekend, and God, I don't really care about that. I don't want to hear about that. They're having the birthday party. I have to go in and put a smile on my face and eat cake, right? I wish I could be at home. The flip side, the people at home are like, I don't get that transition. I wake up and my commute, as you can kind of see here behind me, is literally 2 seconds. I don't have the disconnect going in or coming home. Boy, I don't get to talk to Jane or Jeremy to find out how things are. I don't get the social interaction. And boy, that's a bummer. When I'm virtual, I don't get to participate in the birthday celebrations and those types of things. So it's really interesting to see that in this environment, employees on both sides almost look to the other side and say, boy, I really miss that. I wish I could have that. So employers in some way have to figure out how to get people engaged so we can create the environment where wherever somebody is going to log into their computer, they feel like they're attached to the team. I will second what Candance said. I think that going forward, the hybrid model really, I think, is going to be the way of the future. Going back to what we talked about earlier, I think engaging your current employees, engaging future employees to find out truly what it is that they need from a personal standpoint to be successful in the workplace are the questions we're going to have to ask and we're going to have to offer. But from an employer standpoint, we are going to have to be more involved in the feelings of our employees than we ever had to be in the past.
And I'm going to dig into that in the next question. And we have a fantastic question in the chat from Lisa Kapoor as well that we're going to get to. But real quick, I want to make sure I get Hilary to kind of weigh in on this, because we talked about kind of policies and we've heard kind of the equitable piece. We've heard the piece of offering flexibility. And Hilary, we talked a little bit about kind of best practices for rationale as well. So can I get you to weigh in on this?
Yeah, so first, I mean, every company must specifically define what they mean by these terms we're throwing around, like flexibility and hybrid, and set very clear boundaries accordingly so that it's clear and employees aren't trying to interpret what their company means by, the same word that another company might define it totally differently. For those frontline employees, like many of you have said, there isn't always that ability to offer the traditional flexible, the working arrangement. So we encourage companies to consider other ways to get at what that flexibility provides. Looking at alternatives like additional PTO, maybe early leave or a condensed work schedule. In working with clients, we find that one best practice is, for example, define core hours or a day when all your team members come into the office, and then allowing the flexibility however you define it other times. And as those teams return to the office, be sure to give very clear rationale and direction: who, why, when, and empower those mid-level people managers as the key communicators, because they can compassionately navigate the individual circumstances and over-index on appreciation, because that goes a really long way. Just demonstrate empathy always. Everyone has something different going on, and celebrate those on the front lines who never stop showing up or who must now return to the office. So consider human-centric ways to really rally the workforce in support of the company's future, and ensure consistency between, rallying words and also the real actions you're taking.
And the chat we have a lot of questions coming in. So I do want to ask, so this is from Jan Costner, who spoke earlier with the chamber. She said, can each of the panelists share what their work policy is and how it's working? So maybe I would love to know, just because the cool thing about being in a meeting is I can see faces. Can we do a show of hands who is hybrid? You guys you don't have to turn your cameras on. You can do the little, or you can, I see, you can also do those little reaction thing. You can raise your hand. Who's hybrid here? The chamber is. We're in 2 days a week. Okay, I see a good show of hands. I'd say over half. Okay, perfect. I wanted to understand, because we're honing in on the hybrid model. But any of our speakers, I'll throw that out to any of you on kind of just if you're comfortable sharing kind of what your policy in your office is.
Yeah, I'll jump in on this. This is something that I have found very, very interesting within the last 20 months, right? Prior to the pandemic, we had a lot of the clients that we supported that asked us to spend some time on site with them. We have found in the last 20 months that we're we actually are able to do pretty much everything virtually. And so we were able to really pivot in the support of all of our clients to 100% being virtual. Therefore, for me, I have literally left it up to my team. Those individuals that want to go back to the office, if they want to go back to a client site and the client wants them back, they can. If they want to stay virtual and they can do it, because I know they can, they do it virtually. I would say at this point, 90% of my team still is 100% virtual.
Yeah. Anyone else want to share?
I can jump in. We're pretty much fully virtual as well. We do have office space. If you'd like to go in, you're welcome to. We actually tried on my team one of the best practices we mentioned, and for I'd say pretty much the month of July, we all went in on Thursdays, which was really nice. But then with Delta picking back up, we kind of stopped that. Yeah, at one point we had just one floor open, so not the entire office, so they didn't have to clean everything, but just one floor open for those who are interested in office space. But from the most part, we're mostly virtual.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for Aon as well, I actually facilitated the use of Aon's decision making in this process, and throughout that process we actually interviewed over 50 leaders across North America. I mean, Aon has, I think, over 50,000 employees, and so you can imagine there was a lot of differing opinions about what it is best, what will work best for different parts of Aon. And so I think the flexibility piece really came loud and clear. And we are, kind of from a North America perspective, hybrid, and how that is rolled out will actually kind of be up to each of the business line leaders and the managers themselves to manage that and really facilitate that in the best way for their organization or for their group.
Wonderful. I want to make sure that we get to one of the first questions that came in when it was from Lisa Kapoor. It's a wonderful question. And it cues actually to one of the questions that we talked about in a prep call about kind of holistically being able to bring yourself to work and creating a supportive and inclusive work environment. It also touches on exactly something that many of you, I've heard the word burnout mentioned several times during this. And the Chamber actually did an event last week as part of our healthcare council. It was all about employee burnout. So everyone, if you're feeling burnout, you are not alone. Don't worry, this is a safe space on this call. So the question is, are any employers creating an open forum where employees can discuss the tremendous loss of loved ones suffered as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic as a tool to retain employees? Many people are suffering in silence and feeling robotic because they are required to set their feelings aside and get work done when they are quite literally losing family members and friends to the virus.
Can I speak to that?
Of course.
So this isn't with NextGroup itself, but with a number of the employers we're working with, and we've helped advise them. The issue that we had talked about before about managers having so much more to take on and being prepared to that because they're also trying to help with well-being. A few of our employers have implemented just more of a networked approach to support systems. So making sure that every employee has someone else that they can have some of those trusted conversations with, not in a communal setting necessarily, but realizing that they need a partner through work that they can talk about loss. And then if it needs to get more formalized, but having just relationship building across, just based on that and connecting people, which we've seen not only help managers because it's not just a one-to-many, but a many-to-many support system throughout the organization that I think is working quite well.
Candance, you know what you mentioned? So last week, it's called a battle buddy. They have a name for it.
Well,
you have a battle buddy at work, you are seen as, they often see higher levels of satisfaction and longer retention.
See, I thought I came up with it, but I guess I didn't.
Well, I didn't come up with it. The head of Mehta came up with it, but
there are new ideas. But
can I ask? I want to make sure we get through. We have a lot of questions coming in, so maybe I could just ask if anyone else has anything to add on that question or anything that they've seen their organization or clients or sister organizations do that seems to be working.
Just real quickly, the only thing I would say is just leadership needs to be more flexible. You need to give your employees their time because everybody's going to deal with it in their own space. There just needs to be more flexibility than historically there was for people to work through their personal issues. Yeah,
I agree. Okay, we have another question come in. This is from Dara Crowfoot, who's with University of Illinois, Chicago. Dara, I appreciate what Hannah said about the importance of companies looking internally to fill roles. As she said, it might mean reimagining roles and upscaling employees. Have the panelists seen companies doing this well? What are they doing? How are they doing the upskilling? How do you recommend companies get started on this? Hannah, can I go to you for this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's two examples that come to mind very quickly to me about cases where, the upskilling or reskilling was driven from necessity. One of those being, a retail store manager, where with the increase in online sales, that job has really transitioned to more of almost like a warehouse role, or really supporting kind of a dual requirements of both, driving the sales within the store, but also thinking more holistically about almost being like a mini distribution center. And so I think in the case where that has been successful, part of that is because it was really necessitated by the environment. We also see cases, or where I've seen this, companies trying to be a little bit more proactive when they're thinking about roles that might, kind of disappear. Something like, say, a bank teller, or something like in, we're hearing a lot about, quality assurance roles, QR roles actually kind of decreasing in some of the banks. And so they're looking at this population saying, okay, well, where actually might this work well? Where might these roles or these people have skills that will fit within our organization? Where do we have jobs that are open that we can't fill? And can we shuffle those into these jobs? So I think thinking about things like what are you going to need in the future? Things like, even like digital skills. We're seeing companies partner with organizations that do, say, tech boot camps, because they need those tech jobs and there's a lack of them in the market. And so they start sourcing internally to facilitate that transition. You're driving support among your employees, you're driving loyalty, and you're also starting with a subset of the population that already knows your culture and is hopefully bought in to that. So I think that's one way that you can do it. I think, on a smaller scale, understanding, how jobs work within your organization and what the structure is. Is there anything you basically want to make sure there's nothing getting in the way of organizations, of employees moving through the organization. And if job movement is what you're looking for, that really has to be something that you kind of promote within your culture, and make sure that your managers are willing to reach across the aisle and grab someone from a different team or help facilitate that transition, as well as kind of having open discussions. If that's something that's really a high priority, making sure that you make the connections, say, okay, this person, they might not be a fit here, but we think they're, a bright individual. We want to help them, so the manager can help facilitate discussions, with other departments where they might actually fit in or work better.
And I'm going to plug, the chamber actually has a training grant right now where we can offset some of the costs of our members wanting to upskill and retrain their workforces. We very much promote kind of looking within, Hannah, what you just mentioned, especially for those tech skills. So I'm happy to send more info out here as well. We do have a question. I'm going to ask Jennifer Ginsburg. Jennifer, are you still on?
Hi, yeah, I'm still here.
Hey,
Thanks,
hi
Amelia.
there. If you want to go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, I couldn't type it all because I have some background. So basically I work for National Louis University and I'm in the employer relations department, and what we're seeing, or what I'm seeing personally, is that a lot of entry-level roles that we would typically share out with our new graduates, our new undergraduate level graduates, employers are shying away from new graduates that don't have a ton of experience because they're so short-staffed that they don't have the time for training and development. I just had a conversation yesterday with an organization that basically was like, yes, this job is entry-level, but I just hired someone who has a master's degree. And I'm like, but it's an entry-level opportunity. So there's such a disconnect there. I'm wondering how new graduates from bachelor's level programs can kind of overcome this hurdle of competing with people with a lot more experience for entry-level type roles.
Thank you. That's a great question. I knew we had some universities on the line coming up with questions. Hilary, can I direct this one to you? Because I feel like there is a communications kind of experiential branding component of this. So I think maybe you'd have something to share.
I know when I'm looking at resumes, I definitely deem during university internships to be real experience, right? So getting internship experience while they are pursuing that bachelor's degree can help them better compete.
We are coming up on, or does anyone else have anything to add? Jennifer, National Louis is a member and we should connect to see if we can be helpful as well in matching your students with some companies and making sure.
Yeah, and it seems like this is kind of a new trend, and it's simply because of the lack of bandwidth that a lot of organizations have right now, because this hasn't necessarily been an issue before. I've been in employee relations for many years, and I haven't had this kind of issue with the entry level opportunities, that they're going for like much higher level people, even though the pay is the same. So it's just an interesting trend that kind of creates a little bit of hardship for our new graduates.
Yeah, we'll see if we can be helpful there. So this hour flew by, as it always does. I want to say thank you guys again to Hannah, Hilary, Candace, and Greg. I want to thank all of you for joining. I realize that a lot of us are zoomed out. And I'm just so appreciative to our panelists for giving us their time and insights, to all of you for joining and being so candid and open with your questions. And I want to say also thank you again to our sponsors, Steve Ferrara, BDO, BMO Harris Bank. I think I saw Steve Fansler on the line. And then of course our partners at Aon, JP Vicky are on the line. We could not do this type of programming without you guys. Middle Market will be doing one more program before the end of the year. It will be in December. And so I'll be sure to follow up with all of you as well to make sure you have that info. And thank you guys again. And I will send you on your way for the rest of the day. And we will share the resources and recordings as well. So thank you, everybody. Thanks again to our speakers.